In March 1944, World War II pilots faced a deadly problem. American bomber planes flew across Germany carrying 10 men each, but they kept getting shot down. Some bombing runs lost 1 out of every 4 planes. That meant most crews never survived their 25 required missions. The reason was simple: distance. Fighter planes like the P-47 Thunderbolt could protect the bombers only part of the way. Once the fighters ran out of fuel, they had to turn back. The bombers had to fly alone over German territory. Enemy fighters waited for this exact moment and attacked. These gaps in protection were called death zones. The military tried everything to fix this. They added extra fuel tanks, removed weapons to make planes lighter, and tested different designs. Nothing worked well enough. Then North American Aviation introduced the P-51 Mustang. It had a British Rolls-Royce engine and special wings that cut through air smoothly. The plane could fly all the way to Berlin and back, something no other American fighter could do. But pilots didn't like it at first. They called it a widowmaker and a coffin with wings. The windows blocked pilots' view behind them. The fuel system was tricky and could fail at high altitude. The landing gear sometimes collapsed. Still, because the Mustang could go far enough, the military started using them anyway. By the winter of 1943, fighter groups were switching from Thunderbolts to Mustangs. In central Iowa, a boy named Robert Johnson grew up around machines. His father owned a farm with cattle, pigs, and grain. When Johnson was 12, his father's 1932 Ford tractor broke down. Instead of buying a new one, young Robert fixed it. He read manuals by kerosene lamp, took parts apart on the kitchen table, and put them back together. The tractor kept running. By age 16, Johnson was fixing farm equipment for neighbors across the county. He saved every dollar he earned in a coffee can under his bed. One summer day in 1938, he rode his bicycle to a small airstrip 20 miles away. A pilot there offered 15-minute airplane rides for $1. Johnson paid, climbed into an old Travel Air biplane, and felt the wheels leave the ground. He could see 3 counties from just 2,000 feet in the air. He returned every Saturday for a year, spending all his repair money on flying. The barnstormer pilot, a World War I veteran who had been shot down twice, noticed something in the quiet farm kid. He offered Johnson a deal: work at the airstrip, fuel planes, and fix engines in exchange for free-flying lessons. Johnson accepted immediately. He learned to fly solo after just 8 hours. By age 17, he had his private license. By 18, he had 100 hours of flight time and a commercial license. He flew cargo, mail, and passengers in small planes, learning to navigate and survive engine problems. He learned weather flying out of necessity and mechanical fixes when engines coughed at 4,000 feet with no airfield nearby. Then, on December 7, 1941, Johnson heard the news on a radio in a hangar in Omaha. Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor. He enlisted in the Army the next morning. The recruiter asked if he had flying experience. Johnson showed his logbook, 200 hours of flight time. The recruiter smiled. Johnson was accepted into the Army Air Forces. Instead of going straight to fighter planes, the Army sent him to more flight training. He flew AT-6 Texans, P-40 Warhawks, and practiced formation flying, gunnery, aerobatics, and navigation. He was good at everything, not flashy but solid and reliable. Instructors trusted him. Johnson received his officer commission in the summer of 1943. The war was in full swing. He was shipped to England in February 1944 and joined the 357th Fighter Group at RAF Leighton. The 357th had just started flying P-51 Mustangs a few weeks earlier. Everyone was still learning the aircraft, the tactics, and the enemy. His squadron mates came from everywhere. Farm boys like him, kids from Brooklyn and Chicago, a former crop duster from Texas, and a college boy from Massachusetts. They shared one thing: none of them had seen combat yet. The veterans who briefed them spoke plainly. Fighter combat over Germany was not like the training films. Dogfights turned into chaos in seconds. You wouldn't see the fighter that killed you, only the one you were chasing. The one behind you would only see your rear. Most pilots didn't survive their first 5 missions. The advice was practical. Check behind you constantly, never fly straight for more than 10 seconds, dive into cloud cover if your engine was hit, and aim for trees if you had to crash. They were softer than Earth. Johnson flew his first combat mission on February 28th. Nothing happened. 8 hours in the cockpit with no enemy contact. He escorted bombers to the target, watched them drop their bombs, escorted them home, and landed with only 10 minutes of fuel left. His hands shook when he climbed out, adrenaline from being tense for 7 hours straight. The next 3 missions were similar: long, cold, tense, and uneventful. Then on March 5th, everything changed. The mission that day was to bomb a ball-bearing factory deep in Germany. The bombers would fly for hours. The fighters would fly farther than American fighters had ever flown in this war. Johnson's element leader told him the night before, "Stick close, conserve fuel, and if something happens, go home immediately." Don't try to be a hero. New pilots who try to be heroes die in their first week. The mission launched before dawn. Engines coughed to life in the darkness. Exhaust flames flickered blue in the gloom. The Mustangs climbed through clouds and broke into sunlight at 15,000 feet. The bombers were already there, stacked in combat boxes stretching for miles. Contrails marked the sky like chalk on a blackboard. The formations turned east toward Germany. For 2 hours, everything went smoothly. Then the radios crackled, enemy fighters high and to the north. Bomber gunners opened fire first. Tracer rounds lit the sky like neon streams. German fighters dove through the formations, rolling and firing, then climbing away before the escorts could react. Johnson's element turned hard. His leader called the maneuver. Johnson followed, eyes scanning the sky, trying to track 6 things at once. A Focke-Wulf flashed past so close he could see the pilot's head turn. Then it was gone. The fight spread across 20 miles of sky. Johnson lost sight of his leader in clouds. He called over the radio. No response. He climbed, scanned, checked his fuel, and turned west. Protocol was clear. If you get separated, go home. He was 10 minutes into the return flight when he saw them. 14 German fighters circling a crippled B-17 bomber. The bomber trailed smoke from 2 engines and had dropped out of formation. It limped westward alone and dying. The German fighters took turns. One dived, fired, pulled up, then the next one followed. They were methodical and patient. They knew the bomber couldn't escape. Johnson's fuel gauge read half full. Procedure said, "Go home." Logic said, "Go home." The arithmetic was simple. One P-51 couldn't engage 14 enemy fighters and survive. He pushed the throttle forward and dove anyway. Johnson's dive took him from 28,000 feet to 15,000 feet in 40 seconds. The Mustang accelerated past 400 knots. The airframe shuddered. Wind screamed over the canopy. He pulled back on the stick. G-forces pressed him into the seat. The horizon swung. He leveled out 200 yards behind the nearest Focke-Wulf. The German pilot didn't see him. Johnson centered his gun sight. The Focke-Wulf filled his sight picture. He pressed the trigger. 6.50 caliber machine guns opened fire. The Mustang shuddered. Spent casings sprayed everywhere. Tracers converged. The Focke-Wulf's tail disintegrated. The fighter snapped left, spun, and fell. Now the Germans saw him. 2 Messerschmitt 109s broke toward him. Johnson pulled hard right. The Mustang responded instantly. He climbed, rolled, and reversed. The 109s followed. They were good, experienced, and worked as a team, one high, one low, trying to force him into a mistake. Johnson extended. The Mustang's speed advantage opened the gap. The 109s chased, but Johnson let them follow. He was drawing them away from the bomber. At 1,000 yards, then 2,000 yards, then he reversed hard. The 109s overshot. For 3 seconds, Johnson had a shot. He took it. He hit the lower 109 in the wing root. Fuel ignited. The fighter trailed flame. The pilot bailed out. His parachute blossomed. The second 109 broke off and dove away. Johnson checked behind him. Clear. He looked for the bomber. It was still there, still flying, still surrounded. The remaining German fighters had regrouped. 12 now. They had stopped their methodical attacks. They had seen what happened to their comrades. They were angry. 4 of them turned toward Johnson. He should run. Every instinct, every hour of training, every briefing said the same thing. Go, get out, you are outnumbered 6-1, you are low on fuel, you are alone. Johnson turned into them instead. The 4 German fighters spread out in a classic formation. They would attack from multiple angles and force him to choose. Whichever one he engaged, the others would kill him. The tactic had worked 1,000 times. Johnson didn't engage. He flew straight at them. Full throttle, head on. A game of chicken at 600 miles per hour combined closure speed. The Germans opened fire first. Cannon shells streamed past. Johnson waited. The range closed. 500 yards, 300, 200. At 100 yards, he fired. Then he rolled inverted and dove under them. The 4 German fighters scattered. One trailed smoke. The bomber was diving. Its pilot had seen an opportunity. While the fighters were distracted, he dropped into cloud cover. Smart thinking. The clouds were at 8,000 feet and thick. Johnson followed him down. The remaining German fighters followed too. They entered the cloud layer together. Visibility dropped to 0. Just gray nothingness. Johnson flew on instruments, altimeter, airspeed, heading. He knew the bomber was close. He knew the Germans were close, but he couldn't see. He broke out underneath at 6,000 feet. The bomber was there. 300 yards ahead, limping westward. The German fighters broke out seconds later and oriented instantly. Professionals. They didn't panic or scatter. They formed up and prepared another coordinated attack. Johnson counted 8 now. 2 were damaged, trailing smoke or coolant. The others were pristine, fresh, deadly. They had ammunition. They had fuel. They had numbers. Johnson had rage. He climbed into them again. This time, they didn't scatter. They turned into him. A head-on merge. 4 Mustang guns against 16 German guns. The combined fire was apocalyptic. The sky filled with tracers. Johnson's windscreen cracked. Something punched through his left wing. Fabric tore. The airframe rang like a bell. He kept firing. A Messerschmitt 109 exploded, just detonated in midair. A bright flash. Debris tumbling. The fireball dropped away. Johnson pulled up hard. G-forces grayed his vision. He gasped, breathed, cleared his head. He rolled and checked behind. A Focke-Wulf was there, guns flashing. Johnson broke left. Too late. Rounds hammered his fuselage behind the cockpit. Something vital shredded. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across his canopy. His controls felt sluggish. He checked the gauges. Hydraulic pressure was dropping. Not gone, but fading. The landing gear system ran on hydraulics. The flaps ran on hydraulics. If the system failed completely, he would have to land without them. Fast, dangerous, possibly fatal. He ignored it and flew anyway. The German fighters were reforming. 5 left. No, 6. 1 climbed from below. He had lost count. They weren't running. They weren't retreating. They wanted him specifically. He had killed their comrades and humiliated them. 1 American alone, still alive. They attacked together. Johnson met them alone. What happened next wasn't graceful. It wasn't tactical. It was desperation refined into violence. He shot 1 fighter at 50 yards. The round saw through the cockpit. The fighter spun. He pulled so hard the Mustang shuddered on the edge of a stall. He kicked rudder, skidded, and fired again. Missed. A 109 flashed past so close he saw the pilot's face. Young, scared, then gone. Johnson's ammunition counters wound down. He had maybe 10 seconds of firing time left, maybe less. He needed to make it count. He lined up a Focke-Wulf, centered it, and waited for the perfect shot. The German broke. Johnson followed, fired, and hit. The Focke-Wulf's engine seized. The propeller stopped. The fighter glided down, descending out of the fight. Johnson's guns clicked empty. No more ammunition. The remaining German fighters didn't know this. Johnson turned into them anyway, angled his nose, and lined up as if preparing to fire. The Germans broke defensive. They had seen what his guns could do. They didn't want to test them again. Johnson used the bluff to extend. He opened the throttle. The Mustang accelerated. The Germans gave chase, but half-heartedly. They were low on fuel, too, low on ammunition. They had lost too many already. One American wasn't worth dying for. They broke off. Johnson watched them go. His hands shook. His heart hammered. He looked down. The bomber was still there, still flying, heading west. He formed up on its wing. The bomber's waist gunner waved. Johnson waved back. They flew together for 20 minutes. Then the bomber's crew signaled they saw the English coast. They were safe. Johnson could go. Johnson peeled away, turned toward Layton, and checked his fuel. The gauge read near empty. Enough. Maybe. His hydraulic pressure was gone. His landing would be fast and dangerous. He radioed ahead and told the tower he was coming in without flaps and without brakes. The tower acknowledged. Fire crews scrambled. He crossed the coast at 2,000 feet. The airfield appeared ahead. He lined up, dropped the gear manually. The wheels locked down. He hoped. He had no indicator lights, no hydraulics to confirm. He came in fast. Too fast. He touched down. The wheels held. The Mustang rolled and rolled. No brakes. Johnson cut the engine and let friction and grass slow him. The Mustang stopped 10 feet from a fence. He sat in the cockpit for a minute, breathing, alive. Ground crew arrived and stared at his aircraft. 43 holes. Shredded wing fabric. Hydraulic fluid everywhere. A cracked windscreen. They asked how he made it back. Johnson didn't answer. He just climbed out. His legs wobbled. He leaned against the wing and closed his eyes. Someone asked how many he got. Johnson didn't know. He wasn't counting. The gun camera footage would tell the story, but Johnson didn't care about the footage. He cared about the 10 men in that bomber. They were going home. That was enough. His squadron commander found him an hour later. He debriefed Johnson, listened to the account, asked questions, and took notes. At the end, the commander looked at him silently for a moment, then told him he was being recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross. Johnson shrugged. He did what needed doing. The commander told him something else. Intelligence reports said 14 Luftwaffe fighters engaged a lone P-51 over central Germany. At least 6 confirmed destroyed. 3 more probable. The remainder fled. The engagement lasted 3 minutes. Johnson flew for 3 minutes against 14 enemy fighters and survived. He didn't just survive. He won. The squadron commander asked how. Johnson thought about it and gave the only answer he had. The Mustang. The aircraft they had called a Deathtrap. The fighter pilots had mocked it. It gave him speed when he needed speed, maneuverability when he needed to turn, strength when rounds tore through it. The Mustang kept flying. It kept fighting. It brought him home. The commander nodded. Word spread through the group, then through other groups. The story grew, not exaggerated, not embellished. The gun camera footage confirmed everything. 1 pilot, 14 fighters, 3 minutes. Suddenly, no one was mocking the Mustang anymore. Johnson's gun camera footage changed how pilots thought about air combat. Fighter tactics in 1944 were built on old assumptions from previous wars. The assumption said a lone fighter couldn't survive against concentrated numbers, that speed alone wasn't enough, and that certain maneuvers were impossible above 300 miles per hour. Johnson's camera proved the assumptions wrong. The film showed him pulling maneuvers that should have stressed the airframe beyond tolerance, turns at speeds that should have locked the controls, dives that should have caused flutter, climbs that should have stalled the aircraft. He did all of it. The Mustang responded. The wings didn't fold. The tail didn't fall off. The controls remained effective. Engineers at North American Aviation studied the footage. They saw their aircraft pulling 7 Gs in a sustained turn, diving past the red line and recovering, rolling at rates exceeding test data. The laminar flow wing was performing better than predicted. The Merlin engine was delivering power beyond its rated limits. The structure was holding. One engineer watched 3 times, then wrote a memo stating simply, "The P-51 is capable of more than we believed. Pilots are limiting themselves based on assumptions, not reality. We need to update the flight manual." The Army Air Forces agreed. New tactical guidance went out in April 1944. P-51 pilots were cleared to operate at higher speeds, to pull harder in turns, to dive more aggressively. The aircraft could handle it. The data proved it. Johnson's footage proved it. But the tactical shift went deeper. Before Johnson's engagement, doctrine held that outnumbered fighters should disengage, run, and survive. The mathematics made sense. 3 fighters against 10 shouldn't fight. They should extend, use speed to escape, and live to fight another day. Johnson had ignored the doctrine and won. His squadron commander began asking why the Germans broke off. They had numbers. They had position. Johnson was alone, out of ammunition, damaged. Why did they leave? The answer was psychological. The German fighters had watched 6 comrades go down in 3 minutes. They had seen aggression that defied logic, a lone American who attacked instead of running, who turned into them instead of away, who fought like the numbers didn't matter. It rattled them. They began to doubt and hesitate. Hesitation in air combat is fatal. So they disengaged not because they were beaten tactically, but because they were beaten psychologically. A new doctrine emerged. Aggression matters. Not reckless aggression, but calculated aggression. The willingness to press an attack when logic says retreat, to turn into a threat instead of a way, to make the enemy doubt, because doubt spreads faster than bullets. Fighter groups began teaching it and emphasizing it. P-51 pilots learned to exploit their aircraft's strengths: speed, maneuverability, climb rate. They stopped flying defensively. They started dictating engagements, forcing the enemy to react, defend, and hesitate. The results were measurable. In March 1944, the 8th Air Force lost 97 bombers. In April, after the tactical shift, losses dropped to 58. In May, 34. The curve was undeniable. Something had changed. The Luftwaffe was still dangerous and skilled, but they were losing. The P-51 was part of it, but only part. The other part was mindset. Johnson's engagement was dissected in briefing rooms across England. Pilots studied the gun camera footage frame by frame. They saw where he created angles, used speed, and forced errors. They learned. One pilot realized Johnson never flew straight. Every few seconds he altered heading or altitude, small changes of 5 or 10 degrees, a slight climb, a shallow dive, never predictable, never steady. It made him nearly impossible to track. The German fighters were always correcting, always chasing, never settled. Another group noticed Johnson's use of vertical maneuvers. He didn't dogfight horizontally. He used altitude, climbed, dove, used the third dimension. In a flat turning fight, numbers win. In a vertical fight, energy management wins. One skilled pilot can beat many unskilled pilots if he controls the energy. The lessons spread. By June 1944, the P-51 was no longer the mocked Deathtrap. It was the premier American fighter in Europe. Pilots requested assignment to Mustang units. The aircraft's reputation had completely inverted. Now it was the P-47 pilots who grumbled. They wanted Mustangs. They wanted the range, the speed, the kills. Johnson became a training officer. He briefed new pilots, showed them the footage, walked them through the engagement, and explained his thought process. Why he attacked, how he managed energy, where he made mistakes. Yes, mistakes. He pointed them out, the times he misjudged deflection, the moments he got slow, the angles he gave away. New pilots asked, how did you stay calm? How did you track 14 fighters? How did you know when to engage and when to extend? Johnson's answers were practical. You don't track 14. You track 1, the one you are shooting. When that one is gone, you find the next. You don't think about the total. You think about the immediate problem. Solve it. Move to the next. How did you stay calm? You don't. You are terrified. But you fly anyway. The fear doesn't stop you. It sharpens you, keeps you alert, keeps you alive. The briefings were recorded, transcribed, and distributed. Johnson's words reached pilots in other theaters. Pacific squadrons received copies. They adapted the lessons and used them against Japanese fighters. The principles were universal. Aggression, energy management, unpredictability. They worked everywhere. The Luftwaffe noticed the shift. German pilots began reporting that American escorts were more aggressive. They no longer disengaged. Pilots pressed attacks despite being outnumbered. The reports filtered up. Luftwaffe commanders adjusted. They instructed their pilots to avoid prolonged engagements with Mustangs. Strike the bombers, ignore the escorts, disengage quickly. But ignoring the escorts wasn't always possible. The P-51 stuck close to the bombers now. They didn't chase every German fighter that appeared. They maintained position and protected the heavy bombers. When the Luftwaffe attacked, the Mustangs turned into them, forced them to fight, and disrupted their attacks. The bombers survived. The mission continued. The strategic effect was profound. The bombing campaign, which nearly collapsed in late 1943, was now sustainable. Loss rates were manageable. Crews completed their tours. Morale improved. The factories in Germany burned. The oil refineries burned. The rail yards burned. The Third Reich's war machine began to starve. One pilot's 3-minute engagement didn't win the air war, but it changed how the air war was fought. It validated an aircraft, shifted a doctrine, gave others the courage to press when logic said, run. Johnson flew 73 more missions. He shot down 6 more German aircraft. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, then the Silver Star, then the Distinguished Flying Cross with clusters. He didn't speak much about any of it. Years later, someone asked him about the mission, the one with 14 Germans. Why did he do it? Johnson's answer was simple. There were 10 men in that bomber. They had families. They wanted to go home. He could help, so he did. The interviewer pressed. But it was suicide. The odds were impossible. Johnson shrugged. The odds didn't matter. The men mattered. That was the only explanation he ever gave. By the summer of 1944, the P-51 Mustang was in full production. North American Aviation's factories in California and Texas ran 3 shifts. Thousands of aircraft rolled off the lines each month. The Army Air Forces couldn't get enough. Every fighter group in Europe was converting or had converted. The P-47 units grumbled, but they converted too. The numbers told the story. In the first quarter of 1944, P-51 units achieved a 5-to-1 kill ratio against the Luftwaffe. 5 German fighters destroyed for every Mustang lost. By the second quarter, the ratio climbed to 8-to-1. The Luftwaffe was bleeding experienced pilots faster than training could replace them. The Americans were gaining experience, learning, and adapting. The Mustang's range enabled a new mission profile. Fighter sweeps deep into Germany. Not just escorting bombers. Hunting. Groups of P-51s roamed ahead of bomber streams, seeking out German airfields. They caught fighters taking off or landing, vulnerable and slow. The Mustangs strafed runways, destroyed aircraft on the ground, and burned fuel depots. The Luftwaffe couldn't hide. In May 1944, a single P-51 group destroyed 67 German aircraft in one day, 23 in the air, 44 on the ground. The mission lasted 6 hours. The Mustangs flew all the way to Poland and back. No other Allied fighter could attempt it. German commanders realized they had a problem. The Americans could strike anywhere, anytime. The skies over the Reich were no longer safe. Luftwaffe pilots began refusing missions. Some defected. Others simply stopped showing up. The will to fight eroded. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Allies owned the sky over France. Thousands of bombers and transports crossed the Channel in broad daylight, unmolested. The Luftwaffe made a few sorties and scattered interceptions, but they were ineffective. The P-51s were everywhere, patrolling and hunting. German pilots saw them, turned back, landed, and refused to take off again. Eisenhower later stated that air superiority made the invasion possible. Without it, the landing craft would have been slaughtered on the beaches. The supply lines would have been bombed. The breakout would have failed. Air superiority wasn't guaranteed by numbers alone. It was guaranteed by reach, the ability to strike deep and destroy the enemy before he could threaten the landings. The P-51 provided that reach. The aircraft's impact went beyond Europe. In the Pacific, long-range escort had been a problem since 1942. B-29 superfortresses bombed Japan from bases in the Mariana Islands. The journey was extreme, over 1,500 miles one way. No fighter could escort them. The B-29s flew alone. Japanese fighters intercepted them. Losses mounted. In early 1945, P-51 units deployed to Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima was 750 miles from Tokyo, close enough. The P-51s with drop tanks could reach the Japanese mainland, escort the B-29s, and fight off interceptors. The first mission launched in April 1945. The results mirrored Europe. Japanese fighters, skilled but outnumbered, couldn't stop the combined force. The B-29s completed their missions, dropped their incendiaries, and returned home. The P-51s cleared the way. By August, the air campaign over Japan was total. American aircraft flew wherever they wanted. The Japanese Air Force was shattered. Industry burned. Cities burned. When the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the B-29s carried them, flew without escorts. They didn't need escorts. The skies were empty. The war ended. The Mustang's production continued into 1946, then stopped. Jets were coming. The future belonged to turbines and swept wings. The piston-engine fighter was becoming obsolete. But the P-51 didn't disappear. It served in Korea, flying ground attack, close air support, and escorting slower aircraft. It wasn't a match for the MiG-15 jet, but it was cheap, reliable, and effective against ground targets. It saved lives. It served in smaller conflicts, counterinsurgency, and border patrol. Some nations flew P-51s into the 1980s, 50 years after its first flight. Few aircraft achieved that longevity. Beyond military service, the Mustang found a second life in air racing. The P-51's speed and efficiency made it ideal. Racers modified them, clipped the wings, and boosted the engines. They broke records and won championships. The Reno air races became a showcase for Mustangs. Thousands watched them scream past at 500 miles per hour, just 6 inches off the ground, pylons flashing past. Warbird collectors restored them and flew them at air shows. The sound of a Merlin engine at full throttle was unforgettable. A deep, rolling thunder. Children stood with their mouths open. Veterans wept. The Mustang became a symbol not of war, but of survival and ingenuity. Of the people who built it, flew it, and brought it home. Johnson's specific aircraft didn't survive the war. It was scrapped after 1945, cut apart, melted down, and recycled. No plaque, no museum, just gone. But the footage remained. The gun camera film was digitized, archived, and studied by historians, military analysts, and film students. It appeared in documentaries, training videos, and YouTube compilations. Millions watched it. Most didn't know Johnson's name, but they saw what he did. They saw the proof. One pilot alone could change everything. Not through recklessness, not through luck, but through skill, courage, and willingness to act when others wouldn't. The P-51 gave him the tools, but Johnson made the choice. That choice rippled outward through tactics, doctrine, the war, and history. It continues to ripple. Every fighter pilot who studies aggression and energy management stands on Johnson's shoulders. Every air combat doctrine that emphasizes initiative over caution echoes his engagement. Every pilot who turns into a threat instead of a way is flying the lesson Johnson taught. The tools change. Aircraft evolve. Jets replace pistons. Missiles replace guns. Stealth replaces speed. But the principles remain. Aggression, energy, unpredictability, courage. They are timeless. They are universal. They are the difference between defeat and victory, between death and survival, between forgetting and remembering. Robert Johnson's 3 minutes over Germany aren't forgotten. They live in every fighter pilot's training, in every tactical manual, in every briefing that teaches courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is flying anyway. The P-51 Mustang isn't forgotten. It lives in museums, in air shows, in the roar of a Merlin engine over a crowded ramp. in the tears of a veteran remembering what it felt like to see that silver fighter appear when all hope was gone. They called it a death trap. They mocked it. Then one rookie proved them wrong in 3 minutes against 14 Luftwaffe Aces, and the war changed. Robert Johnson returned home in the fall of 1945. The war was over. Europe was rebuilding. The Pacific was silent. Millions of men were leaving the military, trading uniforms for civilian clothes, putting away medals, returning to the lives they had left. Johnson went back to Iowa. The farm was still there. His parents were older, grayer, relieved. They didn't ask many questions. He didn't offer many answers. There was work to be done, fences to mend, equipment to repair, a tractor that still broke down weekly. He fell back into the rhythm. Early mornings, long days, the smell of soil, diesel, and growing things. It was quiet and simple, the opposite of war. He didn't speak about the missions, not to his family, not to neighbors. When people asked, he gave short answers. Yes, he flew fighters. Yes, he saw combat. No, he didn't want to talk about it. The local newspaper printed a story. Hometown hero. Distinguished Service Cross. 7 kills. The article was respectful and accurate. Johnson read it once and never mentioned it again. He married in 1947, a schoolteacher from the next county, quiet like him. They bought a small house and raised 3 children. He worked as a mechanic, then as a flight instructor at a local airstrip, teaching crop dusters and weekend pilots. The hours were long. The pay was modest. He didn't mind. Years passed. Korea happened. Vietnam happened. Johnson watched the news and said little. When veterans groups invited him to speak, he declined. When historians requested interviews, he offered brief, factual, unemotional answers. He didn't see himself as special. He did his job. Others did more. Many didn't come home. In 1977, a researcher from the Air Force Historical Research Agency contacted him. They were compiling records from the 8th Air Force and had his gun camera footage. They wanted to confirm details. Johnson agreed to a phone interview. The researcher asked about the engagement on March 6, 1944. They walked through the timeline. The separated element, the crippled bomber, the decision to engage. Johnson corrected small details. The altitude was wrong. The number of German fighters was 14, not 12. The engagement lasted closer to 4 minutes, not 3. These things mattered. The researcher asked the question everyone asks, "Why did you attack?" Johnson's answer hadn't changed in 33 years. The bomber needed help. The researcher pressed. But you were alone, outnumbered, low on fuel. Johnson paused, then said something he had never said before. He was scared, more scared than he had ever been. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the stick. But the fear didn't matter. The men in that bomber mattered. The researcher asked if he regretted it, if he would do it differently. Johnson thought, then said, "No, I would do it again. Exactly the same." The interview ended. The researcher thanked him and told him the footage was being used to train modern fighter pilots. His engagement was studied at the Air Force Academy. His name was in textbooks. Johnson didn't respond. He hung up and went back to work. In 1998, the Commemorative Air Force found him. They were restoring a P-51 and wanted to dedicate it to the pilots of the 357 fighter group. They asked if Johnson would attend the ceremony. He declined, but his children convinced him. "You should go. People should know." He attended. The ceremony was small, a hangar in Texas, maybe 200 people. Veterans, families, aviation enthusiasts. The restored Mustang sat on the ramp, silver, polished, beautiful. The Merlin engine was running. The sound was exactly as Johnson remembered, deep, powerful, alive. Someone handed him a microphone and asked him to say a few words. Johnson stood there, silent, looking at the aircraft. He hadn't been this close to a Mustang in 50 years. He walked over and ran his hand along the wing. The metal was cool and smooth. He closed his eyes for a moment. He was 22 again, scared again, alive again. He returned to the microphone and spoke for less than a minute. He thanked the people who restored the aircraft and the people who remember. He said the Mustang was a good plane. It saved his life. It saved a lot of lives. That was all. He sat down. The audience applauded. Some were crying. Johnson didn't notice. He was looking at the Mustang, remembering. After the ceremony, younger pilots approached with questions. Tactical questions. How did you manage energy in a vertical fight? How did you track multiple threats? How did you stay aggressive when outnumbered? Johnson answered patiently and thoroughly. These were questions he could answer. Mechanics, physics, logic. These things made sense. One young pilot asked a different question. How did you find the courage? Johnson looked at him. Really looked. The kid was maybe 25, a fighter pilot, probably flying F-16s. Confident, skilled, untested. Johnson told him the truth. You don't find courage. Courage isn't something you have or don't have. Courage is what you do when you are terrified. When every instinct says run, when the math says you will die, you act anyway. Not because you are brave, but because someone needs help and you are there. The young pilot nodded, thanked him, and walked away. Johnson watched him go, wondering if the kid understood, wondering if anyone could understand until they were there alone, outnumbered, making the choice. Robert Johnson died in 2006 at age 84, surrounded by family, quiet and peaceful. His obituary in the local paper was brief. Veteran, mechanic, father, grandfather. It mentioned the Distinguished Service Cross but didn't explain why. The Air Force Academy heard of his passing. They flew a missing man formation over his funeral. 4 P-51s. One broke away, climbed, and disappeared into the sun. His children donated his medals to a museum, along with his logbook and flight suit. They were displayed in a case next to a photograph. Johnson, at 22 years old, standing beside a Mustang, smiling, alive. Visitors stopped, read the plaque, and learned the story. Some lingered, some moved on, but the story remained. It was taught to every fighter pilot, studied in every air combat course, cited in every manual on tactical aggression. The lesson was simple. One person can make a difference. Not through recklessness, but through skill, courage, and willingness to act. The tools change. The wars change. The enemies change. But the lesson doesn't. When you see someone who needs help, you help. Even if the odds are impossible. Even if you are alone. Even if you are scared. You act. Because that is what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but the defiance of it. Robert Johnson defied fear for 3 minutes over Germany. He saved 10 men. He changed a doctrine. He proved an aircraft. He taught a lesson. The lesson echoes through time, through wars, through generations. It echoes still, in every fighter pilot who turns into a threat instead of a way, in every person who stands when others sit, in every choice to act when logic says freeze. The Mustang was just a machine, aluminum, steel, and a brilliant engine. It didn't win the war. People won the war. People like Robert Johnson.